Today's session is the continuation of the previous one, that is important periods of American literature. We already discussed the first half of the 20th century in American literature. Today we will see second half of the 20th century and contemporary American literature. The authors of the second half of the 20th century followed in the tradition developed by their predecessors. More movements appeared. Movements like the Beat Generation and EPs. The next is ethnic writers. The writers are African American, Asian, Native American and Jewish. And they were become more involved, and some of the authors may be called postmodernist. New topics became popular. The topics like the revolt against the system, ethnic and racial issues, the Holocaust. And new genres flourished. For example, comic books, fantasy novels, science fiction, horror stories. In this period, the famous writers, first one, J.D. Salinger, who wrote The Catcher in the Rye. It is a short novel about a young man leaving his university studies, disgusted with people around him. The next writer is William Styron. He was a southern writer who is best known for Sophie's Choice. It is the story of a young southerner, Stingo, who befriends a Polish immigrant, Sophie, and her paranoid lover, Nathan. Sophie tells him a story of having to choose between sacrificing one or the other child in a concentration camp during World War II. During this period, many writings are about war. For example, Norman Mailer, best known for his novel The Naked and the Dead, which takes place during World War II in the Pacific. The next writer is Joseph Heller. He wrote Catch-22, a war novel taking place in the Mediterranean. A group of pilots is added new flights to their schedule instead of being laid off. The next writer is Tennessee Williams. He wrote Psychological Place. He is the author of A Cat on the Roof and A Streetcar Named Desire. The Streetcar Named Desire actually a tragedy of a woman raped by her own brother-in-law. It is one of the most quoted American plays ever written. The next famous writer of this period is Arthur Miller. He wrote his famous work Death of a Salesman. Actually, it is a tragedy of a disappointed aging man who commits suicide to ensure his family money from his life insurance. And the next great writer is Edward Albee, and his famous work is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. It's another famous drama of this period. In the 1950s, a group of non-conformist authors emerged, which is now known as the Beat Generation. They refused to fit in the society, revolted against the establishment, experimented with drugs, and criticized consumerism. They preferred spontaneity and traveling. San Francisco became their center. Their literature is still popular and inspirational for many young people. The next famous writer is Jack Kerouac. He wrote On the Road, which became a kind of a Bible for his followers. It tells stories of people traveling across America. Next writer is Lawrence Ferlinghetti, is the best known poet of the generation, together with Allen Ginsberg, who wrote Howl, a poem expressing a beatnik's attitudes. Here the beatnik means a young person in the 1950s and early 1960s belonging to a subculture associated with the Beat Generation. That is, her long back hair and comfortable clothes are the badge of the artist and beatnik. The next person is Charles Bukowski, is well known for his poems and stories full of sex, alcohol and drugs. The next writer is Ken Kesey. He is the author of the famous work One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It is a novel taking place in a mental asylum whose patients rebel against the oppressing. Actually, it's a system represented by Nurse Ratched. The next writer is Truman Capote, was a postmodernist writer who combined fiction and non-fiction, for example, in Cold Blood. Next thing in this period is African American literature. It became more prominent as the struggle for human rights intensified. They followed the so-called Harlem Renaissance, a movement of black writers. The writers like Langston Hughes. This movement has started from the year 1920s. Next famous writer is James Baldwin. He was an essayist and novelist, writing not only about black people's problems but also about homosexuals' problems. The next writer is Toni Morrison, is famous for her novel The Bluest Eye, about a black girl who is raped by her father and becomes pregnant with him. The book criticizes black girls' pursuit of the ideal of beauty embodied by white girls. The next literature is Jewish American literature. It draws inspiration from the painful experience of the Holocaust, but also from the Jewish spirit, tradition and humor. The main hero is often an unlucky outsider. For example, the famous writer Isaac Bashevis Singer, who wrote Kimball the Fool, the story of an unlucky man who has 5 children without sleeping with his wife. The next writer is Bernard Malamud, is the author of The Fixer, a book about Jews experiencing anti-Semitism in Ukraine. The next writer name is Philip Roth. He was accused of being anti-Semitic even though he is Jewish. He wrote Portnoy's Complaint, a book about a boy spied by his mother. The next writer name is Ian Scott Momaday, is probably the best known Native American writer. He wrote The House Made of Dawn, a non-linear novel about an Indian man who belongs neither to his tribe nor to the majority. The next is Asian American. For example, the writers like John Okada and Maxine Hong Kingston. And the next is the Latin American. The writers like Sandra Cisneros. The writers also appeared in this period. New genres have become more popular in the past decades. As for science fiction, Philip K. Dick and Ray Bradbury are worth mentioning. The former is the author of the dystopian novel Do Arnold's Dream of Electric Sheep and A Scanner Darkly. The latter wrote many short stories and the novel Fahrenheit 451 about a society where books are banned and burnt. George R.R. Martin is the author of A Song of Ice and Fire, a series of fantasy books beginning with the best-selling A Game of Thrones. And Stephen King is an example of the modern horror fiction, and his book The Dreamcatcher and The Dark Tower become hits. and teen fiction has become very popular in those years. The Maze Runner by James Dashner being an example of a contemporary bestseller. It was published in the year 1972. So far we discussed the second half of the American literature and contemporary American literature. Next we will move on major movements in American literature. So in this movements, the first one is Native American. It was between 1000 BC to 1472. The dates for this period are unclear because we have absolutely no idea when they began. A lot of the literature of this movement was myths, but the Native Americans still write today. Most of what our text calls Native American myths were written long before Europeans settled. The next movement is Puritan movement. It was between 1472 to 1750. Most of this literature is either utilitarian, very personal, or religious. We call it Puritan because the majority of the writers during this period were strongly influenced by Puritan values. The next movement is Enlightenment movement. It was between 1750 to 1800. This Enlightenment period, due to the influence of science and logic, this period is marked in US literature by political writings. Journals include political documents, speeches, and letters. There was not a complete separation from the Bible, but an expanding of the truths found. The next great movement is Romanticism. It was between 1800 to 1840. Romanticism was a literary and artistic movement of the 19th century that arose in reaction against 18th century neoclassicism. There is a movement here from personal and political documents to entertaining ones. The next one is Transcendentalism. We discussed this thing already. Actually, it was between 1840 to 1855. Transcendentalism was an American literary movement of the 19th century. The Transcendentalists believed that experience and thus are better guides to truth than are the sense and logical reason. And they were influenced by Romanticism. The Transcendentalists respected the individual spirit and the natural world. The next movement is Realism. It was between 1865 to 1915. Realism is a presentation of actual life. Realism was also a literary movement that began during the 19th century and stressed the actual as opposed to the imagined or the fantasy. They reacted against Romanticism and rejecting heroic, adventurous, and unusual or unfamiliar subjects. The last movement is Modern Age. It was between 1915 to 1946, an age of confusion. So it is called as a age of confusion. This period brought us perhaps our best writers. So this period only we got many best writers. The authors during this period raised all the great questions of life but had no suggested answers. They raised questions but they did not give any suggested answers in this period. So overall in this session we have discussed history of American literature, important periods and important writers and their famous work and major movements in American literature. Here my next topic is Emily Dickinson poem. The poem name is If You Were Coming in the Fall. Before I start the poem, we will discuss on Emily Dickinson. He was born in Amherst, Massachusetts, and she was influenced by the great writers like Emerson and Thoreau. Her poetry reflects her life, which she lived in extreme individuality. She did not marry but lived within her family circle. She wrote nearly 1,800 poems in her lifetime. Among these 1,800 poems, 7 poems were published during her lifetime, others posthumously published. Her poems were edited by Thomas H. Johnson. He also edited her letters under the title The Complete Letters of Emily Dickinson. And she deals with the themes of death, faith, nature, love, and immortality. And her famous works are Success is Counted Sweetest, The Soul Selects Her Own Society, Because I Could Not Stop for Death, This is My Letter to the World, and many poems are famous. I have mentioned few poems of Emily Dickinson. She was a poetess of the 20th century, even though she wrote in the 19th century. The reason behind was she never really published her work during her lifetime. She confined herself within a room. Her father never forced her to marry, and he was the part of the Congress and lived quite a progressive life. The scholars says that her writings was fresh, as if someone wrote without the fear of facing criticism. She wrote what she saw and never tried to alter her work for the sake of others. The unconventional use of punctuation and the prolific 1,800 poems showed that she loved writing more as a passion than as a profession. Okay, now analysis on the poem If You Were Coming in the Fall. Actually, in this poem, the speaker waits for the arrival of her lover, but she is undermined of the time. Here the first stanza. If you were coming in the fall, I had brushed the summer by with half a smile and half a spurn, as housewife do a fly. Here the explanation. In the first stanza, she says that if she has to wait for him a season, she would pass summer happily by doing the household activities as the housewife kill away the flies. Here, the reference of housewife determines that the speaker is a lady who is waiting for her lover's arrival but is unsure when will she see him, as the housewives away with the fly. She would also get done with that summer. So, from this first stanza, we come to know if he comes few seasons, after few seasons means I will pass that season like this, that is doing household activities like kill away the flies and other household activities. Now second stanza. if I could see you in a year, I had wind the months in balls and put them each in separate drawers for fear the numbers fuse. So, in this stanza, the lady is seen here managing and passing away the time. She tries to please herself by considering months rather than a year. She says that she will count the months and wrap them as a ball of yarn and keep it separately to go through it one by one. She wants to keep the balls separately because she fears keeping them together will elongate the time period. She is uncertain, yet she wants to comfort herself. We can assume the absence of her lover has been dreadful for the speaker and just in anticipation to meet her lover. So she said, if he will come after few months means I will do like this type of activity, that is ball of yarn, and she keeps that in separate drawers. Next, third stanza. If only centuries delayed, I'd count them on my hand, subtracting till my fingers dropped into Van Diemen's land. So in this third stanza, she is trying to be flexible with the timing when she says, if only centuries delayed, she adds that it is easy for her to pass a century if that is the time required to meet her lover. She is a patient lady, but the uncertainty of her lover's return is making her restless. She says that she will count the years in her hand and live by each till she forgets the years she has passed. The reference to Van Diemen's land is to a far-off place. Now it is called as a Tasmania. So in this stanza, she said, if he will come after century means that too she can pass through counting her fingers. But she doesn't know when he will come. That's a great problem of this lady. Here, fourth stanza. If certain when this life was out, that yours and mine should be, I had toss it yonder like a rind and take eternity. So in this fourth stanza, she shows her dedication for her lover and says that if they are destined to meet in the afterlife, she can happily die to meet him. The speaker says that she doesn't care if life is a barrier for them. She doesn't need a life without him. The speaker's tone consists of hope, but she also knows she can only comfort herself because there lies on uncertainty in meeting him. So in this stanza, if she is supposed to meet him after life means for that also she is ready to meet him, that is she wants to commit suicide for the sake of her lover because she wants to meet him. So this is about fourth stanza. Now fifth stanza. But now uncertain of the length of this, that is between, it goes me like the goblin bee that will not state its sting. So in stanza fifth, the readers are faced with the actual truth when she admits that the uncertainty is worse than the pain caused by the sting of a bee. She feels the length of a time to be ignorant and something that cannot be matched or just passed off. She feels herself it is losing hope. So, the poem revolves around a mind who is yearning to meet someone. The speaker doesn't want the lasting time to wear away her love, so she just wants to take away the duration which is coming as a barrier. The speaker is anxious about the uncertainty caused between those two. The lady wishes to take her life and pass into eternity. If that means she will get to finally meet him. This poem is a sentiment of love in a long distance relationship. The relationship between the poetess and the visitor is unknown, but her inclination towards the visitor is quite evident. The tone of the poem shows eagerness in meeting with someone who lives far away from the poetess. So here the conclusion of the poem is, it is desirable wish to meet our loved ones as soon as possible. The poetess writes to pass through the eternity and wants to win the months in a ball. She also wants to skip the season anticipating his return. The poet is, however, always unsure about the return of her lover. So overall, the poem is about love, separation, anxiety, doubt and dread. So it explores how the absence of a loved one can take a psychological toll on someone. So this poem is about a woman in distress as she awaits in return of her lover. As her lover's absence increases, so does the woman's doubt also increase here. She contemplates suicide briefly but brushes it aside when she realizes that a reunion with her lover can never be certain. Such a wonderful poem of Emily Dickinson we have seen in this session, and thank you for this great opportunity.